Morning, good morning.
Good morning, Chair Esquivel, members of the board. How are you today? Well, I really appreciate being here today. Of course, my name is Yvonne West. I'm the Director of the Office of Enforcement here at the State Water Resources Control Board. And I'm going to be providing you a brief update today about some enforcement highlights from 2024 with a focus on our environmental justice related both initiatives and cases. And I'll wrap up at the end with some short summary of some Office of Enforcement program level enforcement goals. So as you know, the water boards have enforcement authority in a broad range of programs, with our three main program areas being water quality, water rights, and drinking water. The Office of Enforcement provides legal and technical support for enforcement across all the water board's program areas, as well as developing statewide enforcement policy and trainings for the water boards. If you can go ahead and click. I'm going to start with our water quality goals, but as just a larger overview, in 2024, the water boards imposed approximately $37 million in liability through administrative judgments, orders, administrative and judicial, judgments, orders, and settlements. So this slide contains some of those highlights from the different program areas. And starting with water quality, you'll see that our regional boards, with support from state board offices and divisions, conducted over 5,000 inspections in the water quality program. We issued over 3,000 enforcement actions, including 165 administrative civil liability orders, totaling over $19 million, with $9 million of that funding going to supplemental environmental projects in the communities that were impacted by those violations. Another thing I wanted to highlight in our water quality enforcement program was that the Office of Enforcement conducted 2 full days of virtual water quality enforcement training this year. Experts from the Office of Enforcement's legal and technical staff gave presentations on fundamental topics such as inspection procedures and email best practices, as well as some advanced and emerging topics such as the implications of the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision in Sackett versus the United States, which adopted a narrowing definition of waters of the U.S. This training event also featured speakers from United States Environmental Protection Agency and panel discussions led by our regional board colleagues. Nearly 450 water board staff attended both days of this virtual training, so I see that as one of our highlights for that program this year. Next, I'm going to turn to water rights. As you know, water rights enforcement focuses on obtaining accurate and timely diversion and use data and addressing unauthorized diversion and use in flow-impaired watersheds. The Division of Water Rights, among other accomplishments, issued a number of information orders, over approximately 30, in the Scott and Shasta River watershed, as well as the Clear Lake watershed. The orders numbers here, however, doesn't include a significant number, over 180,000 or so, that were issued as part of the Clear Lake emergency regs, which I believe you've heard about other presentations, so I wasn't going to go into them too much. But the division also issued a number of cease and desist orders and administrative civil liability orders this year. Turning to drinking water, if you could go ahead and click, please. The drinking water program, as you know, enforcement focuses on access to safe, clean, affordable water for all of Californians. The Division of Drinking Water implements both the state and the federal Safe Drinking Water Act. And in addition to thousands of formal enforcement actions brought by the Division of Drinking Water, I wanted to highlight that the Office of Enforcement was involved in 2 unique cases this year in assisting the Division of Drinking Water in 2024. The first case, Big Basin Water Company, I can talk about now. And the second case, City of Calexico, will be highlighted later in my presentation when I talk about cases with an environmental justice nexus. So just briefly to touch on Big Basin Water Company, it wasn't a typical enforcement for us. The Office of Enforcement is just getting to the point where we have some resources to assist the Division of Drinking Water with their mission. And Big Basin Water Company was unique. It involved both our drinking water attorneys and our water quality attorneys because it implicated a privately owned drinking water and wastewater system that was damaged in 2020 by the CZU fires. And it was failing due to, in part to this damage and in part to mismanagement of this privately owned system. The Office of Enforcement provided support again to both the Regional Board and the Division of Drinking Water, who, in collaboration with other local county, state, and local agencies, were able to leverage some of the Division of Drinking Water's enforcement tools to have a receiver appointed to the drinking water system, and then voluntarily able to convince the system to go with the same receiver for the wastewater treatment system. And this, in turn, was able to stabilize both the drinking and wastewater systems and provide continued service to this community. So while this was not an EJ environmental justice community or disadvantaged community, it was important. And I believe that the regional board and the state board, Division of Drinking Water, played a crucial role in making sure that service was continued to be provided to this community. I'm going to turn to some of our environmental justice related enforcement initiatives that we spearhead through the Office of Enforcement. The first one I'm going to talk about is our sanitary sewer inspection initiative, and then I'm going to briefly touch on our environmental justice task force and our role in that task force. So I'm going to highlight the sanitary sewer system inspection initiative as an EJ initiative because it involves the use of our available data tools such as CalEnviroScreen to focus compliance inspections on smaller overburdened communities. Conducting these compliance inspections in these communities allows us to identify noncompliance in those communities with the sanitary sewer waste discharge requirements, and subsequent enforcement actions are brought when appropriate to gain compliance in those communities. So the map over here is, of course, from CalEnviroScreen, and it shows our overburdened communities, a percentage of burden kind of throughout the state there. In 2022, the Office of Enforcement's Special Investigations Unit, namely in our staff, Jamie Johnson, Jeremy Myers, under Brian Elder, and then now under Thomas Edgars, began this initiative, kind of grew a little bit organically. We had a lot of expertise in the Office of Enforcement on collection system inspections, and we thought about how we were going to bring that to the regional boards and spread that knowledge. And so what was developed, or what we embarked on, was an initiative to go region by region and inspect and do these inspections in these communities, in the EJ or overburdened communities, with assistance and accompaniment by regional board staff. So to accomplish this mission, the unit, specifically Jeremy Myers, developed a prioritization model that pulls and analyzes information from our California Integrated Water Quality System database. The information it pulls looks at performance indicators such as high peak factors, number of spills over 100 miles, spills to surface water, percentage volume recovered from those spills, and age of infrastructure. It then takes these and analyzes these performance indicators to identify potential collection systems of concern. And once that list is generated, it then focuses the list on smaller overburdened communities with populations serving under 20,000 and with a CalEnviroScreen score of over 70. So those more overburdened communities. We use this refined list to coordinate with individual regional boards to finalize a target list of systems for inspection. The final coordinated list often includes other collection systems, which were chosen for inspection based on community concerns and complaints or other regional board interests. This is kind of an overview of how this initiative developed and where we are today. So as I mentioned, starting in 2020, the prioritization model was developed. We were able to conduct a small number of inspections to initiate the initiative in Region 3, which resulted in a notice of violation to that system. And then in 2023, we were able to inspect a larger number of systems across multiple regional boards. So in coordination with Region 3, 4, and 5, we were able to conduct 7 inspections with all of those facilities receiving notices of violation. And then 1 additional inspection in Region 3 and 1 additional in 5 based on other regional board interests. And then in 2014, we see the culmination of the initiative in the highest number of inspections to date. We're doing 15 inspections completed across regions 1, 5, 7, 8, and 9. Out of those inspection efforts, we've seen a number of notices of violations and staff enforcement reports, and we anticipate some additional action in 2025 as a result of those inspections. I just want to highlight a few things. This is a breakdown of our 2024 inspections, and the intent of this slide is to really just demonstrate how those efforts break down between the different types of inspections, or why the facilities were identified for inspection. And you can kind of see just based on this breakdown, again, these are just the numbers for 2024. You can see that the efforts are really weighted towards these small overburdened communities. And with 10 of those inspections occurring in those types of communities. And then I also want to highlight that some of the complaint-based inspections also ended up being in overburdened EJ communities. For example, in Region 5, we were able to inspect East Arosi. This was a unique situation because East Arosi isn't currently enrolled in the sanitary sewer waste discharge permit and subject to those requirements, but they are making efforts to come into compliance. And I think the inspection helped further those efforts and also identify what the weaknesses of that system are. Another highlight that was that in Nyland, we were able to do the same inspection and get them re-enrolled in the sanitary sewer waste discharge requirements permit. And they are working on coming into compliance with those permit requirements right now. One thing you might notice if you're looking at the enforcement column on this spreadsheet is you might notice that there are a lot of notices of violation. And I just want to speak to that. Just generally speaking, while notices of violation are an informal enforcement action, they were chosen for this initiative as a primary first step, and they are really the focus at this point. Because at this stage, we want to bring these communities into compliance without adding any additional financial burden to these smaller communities. And these NOVs have proven to be a good tool for agencies to understand their system's deficiencies and to identify how they can improve their program and come into compliance with their WDRs, their waste discharge requirements. So if we can go to the next slide. This is just some highlights from the initiative and where we're headed in 2025. Again, we increased the number of inspections that we were able to complete in 2024. This was through some efficiencies with the program, as well as working and training with regional board staff. Region 9 is currently undertook 2 inspections of their own, and they are planning to conduct 2 more in the near future. We were able to bring a complaint-based inspection and an environmental justice community back into the sanitary sewer waste discharge permits. And so those were really our highlights. And in 2025, we are, again, going to move forward with inspections in Region 2 and 6. And we hope to use our lessons learned to improve the prioritization model for the next round of inspections in smaller overburdened communities, and really work to keep EJ at the forefront of this initiative. Overall, I think our special investigations unit's efforts have led to a significant increase in the number of collection system inspections completed, not only by our office, but also with the regional boards, in coordination with the regional boards. And they've proven an example of how environmental justice can be incorporated into our work at the staff level by prioritizing efforts in these communities by leveraging our access to data like the Cal Enviro Screen. So we're looking forward to continuing these efforts. And I do also want to note that that data, the Cal Enviro Screen data, is used for targeting in other enforcement programs, for example, in Region 9 and Region 4 stormwater. I know they have similar models, and they're using those. I'm going to move on to our Environmental Justice Task Force. The Office of Enforcement represents the water boards in the Environmental Justice Task Force. This is a task force which is a collaboration between US EPA, Cal EPA, and all of the agencies within Cal EPA, and we work together on enforcement and compliance assurance in overburdened communities. The goal of the Environmental Justice Task Force is enforcement engagement that is more transparent, solution-oriented, and responsive to community needs, and more consistent and sustained. So in working to obtain this goal of enhanced, sustained community engagement, the Environmental Justice Task Force works with existing community-led forums that focus on environmental violations, and we're currently working in the pilot communities of Bayview, Hunters Point, Fresno, Kern, and Los Angeles. Our environmental justice liaisons that are assigned to the task force follow up on community complaints. They work across medium, meaning they work whether it's a complaint about air, soil, water, garbage. They work with all of those complaints and various levels of government to seek solutions for the community. They're communicating regularly with the forum's participants regarding their progress and challenges, and these efforts are intended to coordinate and break down government silos and enable speedy mobilization of multi-agency resources to assist these communities. If we go to the next slide, getting into the details of the Environmental Justice Task Force, the Office of Enforcement EJ liaison to the task force is Selena Cole. She represents the water boards for purposes of the task force. She works along with Brian Elder in the office, who is our Office of Enforcement Investigation and Technical Assistance lead. He has an extensive history with the Environmental Justice Task Force program, and together they go into these community meetings. They conduct these inspections. They participate in the Rapid Response Task Force, and they provide transparent information to the communities. So just some of the highlights on this slide. Out of the Rapid Response Task Force, again, this is a multi-agency response to when there's an emergency situation. In 2023, I believe it was, we had a fire at Schnitzer Steel in the Oakland area. We responded with Region 2 as part of the Rapid Response Task Force. And out of those efforts, we have entered into a new, first of its kind, West Oakland Partnership Agreement. And this was recently signed. It is an agreement to engage in ongoing collaborative problem solving with the industry and the community organization West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. It is joined by US EPA, Cal EPA, Department of Toxic Substance Control, and the State Board and the Regional Board. And we're hoping to see where that goes with this collaborative process to see if we can address the impacts that community is feeling from that facility. The Office of Enforcement, as part of these efforts, attended approximately 7 meetings of these community groups and coordinated and responded to their concerns through information such as activity logs specific to the facilities that were inspected, environmental log books, and then just the community liaison being present and responding directly to the community groups during their meetings. We also conduct enforcement inspections and compliance follow-ups at the facilities of concern. I'm going to take a few minutes to just highlight a few cases that I feel are examples of the type of work we do related to environmental justice communities and how we handle them in an enforcement context. This case isn't a traditional administrative process. This was a judicial action, and it was a longstanding CERCLA case. We were involved, the Office of Enforcement and the LA Regional Board. This litigation was for failure to comply with the regional board cleanup orders. We're able to reach an agreement with previous property owners to the site for $9.8 million in settlement. You see this large red square. This shows the site location, and it shows it in Cal EnviroScreen as a disadvantaged community. This is in Compton. And the smaller square has a map of this site. And you can see on that map there's a blue arrow that shows the down gradient, the way that the groundwater travels and the pollutants from the site travel in the down gradient manner in this area. And you see all of the schools. There's a residential community, about 1.5 miles down gradient of this facility. This was an oil recycling facility, and there's a number of concerns with volatile organic compounds, TCE, and other constituents in the groundwater, in the soils. This is a long-standing case in the sense that the regional board brought a cleanup and abatement order in 2014. The Office of Enforcement got engaged in mediation discussions in 2017. And just this year, we were able to bring it to a resolution for at least some of the responsible parties. The significance of this settlement and the engagement of the regional board was that we were able to ensure that all $9.8 million would be deposited in a trust for soil and groundwater cleanup for this site in this community to ensure that the money went to the highest need for cleanup and to help mitigate impacts to this community. So I wanted to identify this. It's a little It's not our traditional administrative enforcement, which will be the next case, but I think it really was necessary, and we played a vital role, again, for securing those funds for the purpose that they should be put to, which is that community cleanup, or the cleanup of that site. This is an example of more of how environmental justice benefits can be seen through our administrative enforcement actions. This is, again, another Region 4 case, and it's a water quality case against the Los Angeles County Sanitation District. This is a case involving a release of 8.5 million gallons of untreated wastewater into the Dominguez Channel. You can see that fountain of untreated sewage on the top right. There were also 13 other smaller sanitation sewer overflows over the 4 years leading up to this event that were included in the settlement. The settlement includes or allows for $5.9 million of that penalty, that $6 million penalty, to be directed towards a supplemental environmental project in an EJ community. It's a stormwater capture and groundwater recharge project, again, in a historically overburdened community in Callis Park. So this is the attorney part of me. I'm going to say this was just reached, this settlement, and so the project is still in the planning phases, but it is envisioned that it will be a project to capture and pre-treat approximately 13.8 acre feet of stormwater annually, and then infiltrate that stormwater on site to groundwater through bioswales, storage vaults, rain gardens, and infiltration galleries. The project is currently in the planning and design phase, and their hope is that it will be completed by January 2028. It'll include multilingual interpretive signage and displays to help the residents learn about the system and to understand what they can do to improve quality of urban runoff. The park where it is located, where the supplemental environmental project is located, has a disadvantaged community score within the top 25% in CalEnviroscreen, and the track itself, where the park is in the 92nd percentile of the disadvantaged community scale. This is an example, again, of what a more typical administrative enforcement, including a supplemental environmental project, can look like. Under the SEP policy, it allows for up to 100% of the penalty to go towards these types of projects. There is undoubtedly a benefit also to the system in the sense that it reduces the amount of water they'll have to treat during rain events. But I think it's a good example of some of the creative settlement that can happen. As I mentioned, the Office of Enforcement is starting to support the Division of Drinking Water in some of their enforcement actions. This was a different and new type of enforcement for both the division and the Office of Enforcement. It was a joint investigation between the Division of Drinking Water and the Attorney General's Office Environmental Justice Bureau. They were investigating the city of Calexico and their shutoff practices during the COVID pandemic. And it determined that customers in the city of Calexico, which is a disadvantaged community, were being subject to illegal water service shutoffs during the pandemic. The investigation led to a joint settlement with the city of Calexico for violations of the Water Shutoff Protection Act, as well as violations of the State Water Board's arrearages program. I'm highlighting this as a beneficial environmental justice settlement because not only did it include $150,000 in penalties to the state board, it also included $200,000 in water conservation programs to benefit the residents and direct credit of over $50,000 to 484 customers who were wrongfully shut off. In addition, the settlement memorializes increased consumer protections for customers under a new compliant shutoff protection plan that the city is obligated to implement. A related action that happened in the last legislative year, SB 3 was passed. SB 3 was passed by the legislature and the government, and it actually extended the shutoff protection plan to smaller systems starting effective August 1st of 2024. This is an area I'm going to highlight in my next slide because it's an area of growth for our office because of the extension of these obligations under the Shutoff Protection Act to these smaller systems is an area where Office of Enforcement will be focusing in the future. Just going to wrap up on our enforcement goals for 2025. In In the water quality program, the Office of Enforcement will be working to address or prevent water quality protection impacts from the Sackett decision, the U.S. Supreme Court Sackett decision. We'll be documenting any impacts that we see from that decision. We'll be working to train staff on how to implement the new narrower definition of waters of the U.S., as well as how to increase our reliance on our state authorities under the Port of Cologne to protect waters of the state from unauthorized discharge and fill violations. In the water rights program, we have worked on drafting with the Division of Water Rights, drafting a water rights enforcement policy, and we'll be coordinating with the division on hopefully the release of a policy for public comment and workshopping in 2025 with the hope of bringing it to the board for consideration and adoption in 2026. And then in the drinking water front, as I had mentioned on my last slide, the Office of Enforcement has gained a few resources to look at Shutoff Protection Act compliance, especially in these smaller systems. We've already received a number of complaints related to shutoffs in disadvantaged in EJ communities through the Environmental Justice Task Force. And we'll be working on developing systems to assess compliance and track compliance, as well as just informing the systems of these new obligations to have a shutoff protection plan in place and to implement it. And so that wraps up my enforcement goals and my presentation that I had for you today. And I'm happy to answer any questions or engage in any discussion.